Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel for what should be the last ever book haul in my mum's house. I have been making videos for so many years now, and you've seen me sort of move back in and out with my mum for short periods of time throughout that, and this background has reappeared continuously. But at the end of this month I'm actually moving into a house with my partner, a much more long-term home than anywhere I've ever lived before. So yeah, all of these books are going to need to find a place there. I don't even have any bookcases, so that's like a whole other thing. Everything else is currently packed and I'm slightly terrified by the number of boxes that have the words books written on them, but that still hasn't deterred me and I have a whole pile of new ones. So yeah, if you'd like to see a bit of like a bookshelf organising, unpacking video when I do move, let me know. But before I get into the books themselves, I want to say a massive thank you to the sponsor of today's video, who are a long-time favourite brand of mine, Ana Luisa. So if you've been watching my videos again for a few years, you'll know I've been wearing Ana Luisa jewellery for years now. I've worked with them quite a few times in the past and they are some of my most worn jewellery pieces. So when they got back in touch and offered to send me a few new pieces for my collection, I could not of course turn them down, because everything I have from Ana Luisa has been such excellent quality. It's all worn so well and I've had some of those pieces for quite a few years now. I've even become an Ana Luisa gifter myself. I've bought multiple people pieces from their lines, whether it be my mum, who has this green stone necklace that she wears all the time. I bought her from Ana Luisa, and also my friend got married last year and I picked her up one of their quite simple necklaces as just like a little celebration, congratulations present, and she's wearing it pretty much every time I see her now. And I know in the US that Mother's Day is still to come this year, so you know, if you're looking for a piece of jewellery to gift somebody special, then it's absolutely worth checking out. I love everything I have, and the newest pieces that they've sent me are actually a lovely pair of like classic gold hoops. I'm a gold hoops girl, whether they be small, big, medium size, slightly more oval, slightly open, thick, thin. I love hoops and I feel hoops go with every outfit. I then also have this really like simple yet statement necklace which has a nice long chain on it. I think a lot of my necklaces have quite high chains, which has really worked for me in the past, but when you've got a v-neck top on, I think it's really nice to have something that dips a little bit lower, and I love this kind of like pebble design. Then another piece that sort of sits perfectly in between that kind of simple but statement range for me is this sort of rope design ring, which will go with pretty much all of the rings I already have, but still does something a little bit extra, you know, with that shape and that texture. I love it. I'm a ring fiddler, so I really enjoy the feel of this ring. So yeah, I'm really happy with the new pieces in my collection. They're gonna slot right in and I know last a really long time based on everything else I have. So if you'd like to check Ana Luisa out for yourself, pick yourself up a treat, pick someone else up a treat, then they will be linked down below in the description box. They're currently running an offer where you can get up to 25% off depending on what you buy, so it's a great time to try them out. And yeah, I cannot recommend them more highly. Genuinely love their stuff. I mean, you probably notice I'm wearing it in most of my videos. But with that said, let's move on to all the books I have acquired in the past 2 months and which I'm going to need to find a home for in my new home. So let's actually start with the 2 books I've already read from this pile, because, you know, why not? And the first one of those is House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson, which is a horror novel that is officially one of my favourite books of the year. Like, you will see this in future favourite videos. I adored it. I could not put it down. It's so creepy and atmospheric and immersive and like tangible. You know, when a book is just written in that way that the atmosphere and the characters and what's happening feels tangible, like you're there, like you could reach out and touch it. And yeah, I am absolutely going to be reading more by this author in the future. This was my first book by Alexis Henderson. But the story itself is about a woman named Marion who has grown up, you know, working class. It's set in a world that's not our world, but which very much resembles a sort of like post-industrialization 19th century version of our world, at least what I understand of it. That's what it reminded me of. And Marion sets out to get out of her current life where she feels like she's going to die young in poverty and miserable by taking up a job as a blood maid, which is a role in the society where women, always women and always young women, go and live with, become indentured by the sort of upper class stately homes, the lords and ladies that live there to provide them with their blood. So they are, you know, sort of bled for their blood so that the sort of top dogs of these houses can drink their blood because it's supposedly good for their health. I won't say anything more than that, but it's so good. It's just so good, guys. We then have a book which is actually a proof and was sent to me by the publisher, but which I immediately jumped into and read, and that is Hera. So actually the title isn't on the front there, but that's the title there. In fact, I'll just hold up the back since that is the title, by Jennifer Saint, which should be out, I think, or literally coming out when you see this video. But if you stay tuned another week or a few days, then you'll also get to see an interview with the author on my channel, or listen to it on my podcast, because I am interviewing Jennifer about Hera for my podcast, That's Ancient History. And this book is stunning and heartbreaking and just so emotionally raw, and also unique, because for all of the Greek myth retellings that are out and have been coming out in particular in the last few years, I find that it's quite rare to see one that's from the perspective of a goddess. They're usually about like demigods or mortals, but never really about like the Olympians themselves. At least that's definitely less frequent to get their sole perspective, and I guess that's maybe because they seem harder to identify with, perhaps because they are gods and goddesses, but also Hera is a character that I very, very rarely see an exploration of her story from her perspective, and it's a hard story to read. Like the story is hard. Some terrible things happen to Hera. Hera is part of some terrible things that happen, and like it's quite gut-wrenching to read, but Jennifer Saint writes it with such like nuance and emotion and care and kindness and honesty that honestly I don't think you could do Hera more justice in a book than Jennifer Saint has in this book. So it was also my birthday in March. I turned 32, and although nobody bought me a book, I don't remember anybody gifting me a book for my birthday. I did go book shopping on my birthday with my friend Jill and my partner Chris. We went to Portobello Books in Portobello, and I picked up 3 books whilst I was there, so I'm going to show those to you. The first one is the latest in the 404 Inkling series, which you know I'm obsessed with. I even wrote a volume in this series, but the latest one to come out is Electric Dreams on Sex, Robots and the Failed Promises of Capitalism by Heather Parry. I've been really excited for this one ever since I saw the blurb announced in the last batch of announcements. So the blurb on the back partially reads, using sex, robots and capitalism as lenses through which to engage with heterosexuality, colonialistic masculinity, regressive feminism and individualism, Heather Parry imagines a society more open to queer, communal interactions where real pleasure is possible. So yeah, so excited, and also what a phenomenal design as always. So I actually specifically planned on buying that book when we popped into Porty Books that day, but the other 2 were books I didn't even know existed. One by an author I have read and enjoyed in the past, and one by an author I've never read before. And the one that I've never read before is Fruit of the Dead by Rachel Lyon. I was immediately drawn in by this cover. I mean, look at it, but not just the cover. The sprayed edges! These are my favourite sprayed edges I've ever seen on a book ever. Like, how articulate, Jean. They are just stunning. I'm obsessed with them. This makes me want to do a display of beautiful sprayed edges where my books are like facing back to front on the bookcases, just to show that off because it's so gorgeous. But this is also a book inspired by Greek mythology. This is the story of Persephone and Demeter, but not set in antiquity. So it's set in the modern age, I think, yeah. So it's set in a time of CEOs of Fortune 500 pharmaceutical companies. So it's set in the here and now, and it's about Demeter and Persephone. So this is not like a romanticized version of the Hades and Persephone myth, which is probably the most common way I see Persephone's story retold, but an exploration of the mother-daughter relationship between Demeter and Persephone when the equivalent of Hades in this world basically abducts her daughter, or employs her daughter and then mistreats her. I'm not sure of the exact context of how it's written in this book, but despite that obviously being a heart-wrenching topic, I think it's really wonderful to see that narrative told from the mother-daughter perspective, because in the trend of romanticized Hades and Persephone retellings, which is like fine in itself, but the overwhelming amount of those kind of brushes Demeter under the rug, and she gets really hard done by when she's actually this incredibly strong mother who's out to defend her daughter. So I'm really excited to read this one. And then then a little pamphlet zine book by Kirsty Logan. So this is Close Your Eyes and Come With Me. Words by Kirsty Logan, illustrated by Block Forest. And I had no idea this was even out there in the world, but I really like Kirsty Logan's writing and I love a little creepy zine. And this is in essence 6 creepy short stories, words by Kirsty Logan with accompanying illustrations. Let me show you some of what the insides look like here. Really just excited to jump in. On that note, I do actually have another little zine, and that is Austerland, a collection of landscapes and stories from East Iceland, illustrated by Hester Asplund. And I picked this up in Black Moon Botanica here in Edinburgh, and the back reads, Tales of Trolls, Hidden Folk and the Otherworldly Landscapes of East Iceland. This book is the result of a 6-week art residency in a remote village on the east coast of Iceland. It is an anthology of traditional stories and landscapes illustrated in ink and accompanied by film photography. So for example, this is some of the photography in this little zine, and these are some of the illustrations. And yeah, I can't wait to get stuck in. I love reading folktales from different cultures, and you know, the fact that they're illustrated is a massive bonus. Now, while we're actually on the topic of magazines or zines, I've been reading some of my favourite zines recently, some issues of Hellebore I hadn't gotten to, and some issues of What, which is a new favourite zine of mine. And in both of those reading experiences, I ended up compelled to buy new books because of the way they were written about and talked about and discussed in those zines. So I thought I'd show you those next. The first one is Beowulf, obviously not a recent work. This is an old English epic poem. But this specific edition is translated by Maria Davana Headley. And like I said, this was talked about in What. I think this one, yeah, was definitely talked about in the first issue of What. And when I was reading this article, I couldn't believe that I hadn't really heard much about this book before. Like, you know, it might have sort of come up in my periphery, but I certainly hadn't fully registered it. And it sounds like a fascinating translation because it takes a very, very modernised approach, which I think is really interesting. And I think, you know, translation as art and art in general, particularly of older, ancient, medieval works, for example, is a fascinating subject. And although I've done a little bit of translation work in terms of like translating passages for academic articles in my PhD, etc., I've never taken my hand to translating a whole work, and that's something I don't feel that like I have the skill to do, because it is a very specific skill and it goes beyond just, you know, like reading a little bit for yourself or reading it in your head, because it's about creating something that can be read by a modern audience to help them maybe feel the way that the original audience would have felt, which is why I think modernising the language is really interesting, because like, sure, it doesn't feel old-timey, but it wouldn't have felt old-timey to the original reader. So I'm really, really excited to read this translation, basically. And then we have a book that came up in an article in Hellebore, and that is Sylvia Townsend Warner's Lolly Willows. So this is a piece of feminist literature from the 20th century. It's a sort of modern classic, as you can see by the Penguin edition. I really love the cover on this one as well, which is about a woman who is dissatisfied with her life and her expectations placed upon her to get married. She's definitely of the upper classes, I believe, who decides to move out to the countryside where she meets Satan, who is a woman. And through this meeting of minds and encounter with the female Satan, we see a version of Satan that is a liberator of women, and through the novel itself, the author explores the position of women and marriage and the expectations placed on women at the time, and some of which I'm sure still apply today. So yeah, I thought that sounded so fascinating, and I believe the protagonist also gets into witchcraft, so yeah. It sounds so modern, like it sounds like something somebody would write today and we'd be like, oh, that's such a cool idea. But it's not, and I love that. There's no real order to any of these books, so I'm just going to pick them up at random now, and the next one on my list is actually a middle grade novel, and that is Time Tub Travellers and the Silk Thief by Claire Linney. Now, I recently just read Hedge Witch, which has nothing specific to do with this book, but it is a middle grade novel, and it was the first time I read a middle grade novel in a few months, and it reminded me how much I love reading middle grade as an adult. Like, there's just something so special and immersive and comforting and adventurous about middle grade novels that no other age range really sort of captures, I feel. So it made me want to pick up some, it made me want to read some more and also pick up some more, and this is one that I'd seen a few times on my TikTok feed because I follow the author. She actually does recommend and review a lot of children's books, and she has phenomenal recommendations and thoughts on those books. I was like, I'm sure I'm gonna love her book. And this is about two friends who discover that one of their grandmothers Tudor's bathtubs can travel in time, and they travel back to Tudor London, where they also discover that there were actually black people, and the surprise there is because their history teacher has very much implied that there were not. So they decide that they are going to gather evidence to prove to their history teacher that in fact, you know, the black people are an important part of British history, but of course they also run into some very Tudor specific dangers whilst they're there. So yeah, I'm really excited to read this one. Then we have another book which was inspired by some of my recent reading, although author specific that this time, and that is Cackle by Rachel Harrison. So I recently read Rachel Harrison's short story collection Bad Dolls, which my friend Jen gave to me, and I really enjoyed it. I would describe it as sort of like literary horror. It was certainly more unsettling than it was scary, but it was also very thought-provoking, and I really enjoyed the writing, so it made me want to check out more by the author. And I looked up her novels to discover this one, which is about a woman in the modern contemporary times now who ends up taking a job as a teacher, I think it is. Does she become a teacher? Yeah, she takes a teaching job in a small village upstate, moving from like her big city life in Manhattan, and makes friends with a local woman who lives in the wood. But there's like a lot of rumours around this woman, and other people seem to avoid her, and her house is very like fairy tale-esque, and is she a witch? I don't know. I'll have to find out. I then have a book I didn't specifically set out to buy because it is from a subscription box that I'm subscribed to, and that is the Afterlight exclusive edition of The Kiss Countdown by Etta Easton, which is one of Illumicrate's subscription boxes. So this is their romance subscription box, which I'm subscribed to. So naturally, this is of course a romance novel, and it's a romance novel about an astronaut, and it also has beautiful sprayed edges for that potential sprayed edge shelf that I was talking about earlier. And it's about Amory and Vincent. Vincent, who is an astronaut, and Amory, who ends up getting a job at NASA, who decide to pull a sort of fake dating stunt. Don't know the whole context of why that happens, but fake dating is always a fun trope in romance, and I can't wait to read it. I love the cover as well. A new release by an author I have read before and thoroughly love is Holly Jackson's new book, The Reappearance of Rachel Price, which is a YA standalone thriller, and this was one of my most anticipated releases of the year because I love Holly Jackson's YA thrillers. She just, she does the best red herrings, the most page turner of YA thrillers out there. Love, 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 love them, and this one sounded really, really interesting. So this book is actually about Belle, who's 18 now, but when she was 2 years old, she was the only witness, of course, you know, with a 2-year-old's sort of capacity to be a witness to the disappearance of Rachel Price. And now, 16 years later, the case has come up again. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I've picked up quite a few books by authors that I've read and loved in the past recently. So another one of those is the first book in the Ravenswood series by Talia Hibbert, A Girl Like Her. And if you saw my favourite books of 2023 video, you'll know that books 2 and 3 in this series were some of my favourite reads of the year. They're also 2 of my favourite contemporary romances of all time, but I haven't read book 1. Controversial, I know. They obviously all follow completely different couples. They're just like chronological in terms of I know this couple work out because they appear in the later 2 books. But it's a romance novel, so of course I knew they worked out anyway. Like, does that matter? No. But I'm really excited to finally read the last book, although it's the first book in this series, because I love them. They're just the most, like, they're just the most lovely romances. I just don't think anybody else writes a contemporary romance like Talia Hibbert. They just, they get me, and I love them. Then we have Extasia, which I actually picked up second hand, but this is a YA horror novel by Claire Legrand. And years ago, I read Claire Legrand's Sawkill Girls, which is another YA horror novel, and really, really enjoyed it. But somehow it completely passed me by that this book had even come out. I saw it on TikTok and was like, huh? And then looked up online and bought a copy. So what is this book about? All you must know is that today I become one of the 4 saints of Haven. The elders will mark me and place the red hood on my head. They will give me my true name, and with my sisters I will stand against the evil power that lives beneath the Black Mountain, an evil that has already killed 9 of our village's men. I will tell no one of the white-eyed beasts that follow me, or the faceless grey women tall as houses, or the girls I saw kissing in the elm grove. Today I become a saint of Haven. I will rid my family of my mother's shame at last and save my people from destruction. I am not afraid. Are you? From New York Times bestselling author Claire Legrand comes an emotionally searing and lyrically written novel that beckons readers to follow its powerful heroine into the world filled with secrets and blood, where the truth is buried in lies and a devastating power awaits, seething for someone brave enough to use it. Yeah, this sounds brilliant, and I loved her other books, so yay. Then a more classic in the horror novel genre is Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu, and this is the cult classic that inspired Dracula. So this is one of the sort of original vampire novels of this ilk, where we see the kind of sort of stately lord lady vampire who lives in their big fancy home, rather than what the original vampire was, which was more of like a zombie-like creature. And as it says, it's inspired a lot of vampire lore and a lot of vampire literature since then. It's also queer, but worth noting is that it wasn't intended as like being like pro-queer at the time. It has a sapphic vampire in it, but the vampire is the bad guy, so it's not necessarily complimentary of that. But I think it's really interesting because I think it's had a bit of a renaissance recently, as a more positive look at sapphic and queer vampirism, and people have sort of started reclaiming this story, which was originally written by a man to sort of condemn a sapphic female vampire. So I think that's really interesting. I'd like to read the original because I've seen a lot of discourse about this book since then, and I think it'd be really interesting to read in terms of understanding the history of the vampire in literature. Another book I picked up secondhand, and is probably my best find in a secondhand shop in the longest time, because this book cost me £1. And once you know what it is, you'll probably understand. This is the Orange Fairy book by Andrew Lang, and it is the Kestrel Books edition, and this is part of a range of fairy books, all titled under different colours, that were compiled by Andrew Lang, who was a folklorist in the 20th century, and they're currently out of print, so you have to buy them like second-hand, print on demand, or the ebook versions. But there's not really currently a like full range, beautifully published hardback collection of them that you can buy that's in print from a publisher, and I think that's such a shame because they're so stunning. And my dream would be to own the Folio Society editions, but they're so expensive because they're out of print. And I currently only own the Blue Fairy book, I think it is, and now the Orange Fairy book, both of which I picked up second hand. But the Blue Fairy book cost me £10, and that still felt like a decent deal. So £1, yes, £1. Then we have a proof I was sent by Pan Macmillan, specifically their Picador imprint, and this is Bonding, which comes out on the 27th of June, so actually only a couple of months now, which is wild to think. And in big bold print on the back it says "Tech will tear us apart," which I really want to read in the tune of "Love will tear us apart," but I'm a terrible singer, so I'm not going to inflict that on you. The blurb reads, adrift in her early 30s, Mary sets out to change her life, one ill-advised decision at a time. First, she books a spontaneous flight to Ibiza, where she meets Tom, a brilliant young chemist working on an experimental drug called Eudaxa that claims to cure the anxieties of modern life. As their connection deepens, Mary thinks she might finally be falling in love. Then Mary lands a job at Opener, an innovative dating app with no limits. Its founder, Mary's ex-girlfriend Lara, will do everything it takes to make it a global phenomenon. When Mary introduces Lara and Tom, love, tech and pharma collide with devastating consequences. As whispers about Eudaxa's side effects begin to grow, Mary is forced to ask whether love is even possible in a society that is falling apart. A really interesting premise, and I'm really interested to read it. Then, last but not least, we have a YA horror thriller novel, and that is Where Sleeping Girls Lie by Frida Abiki Amidi. And this is by the same author as Ace of Spades, which was like a YA dark academia thriller novel that came out a few years ago, and there was so much hype around, and I've been meaning to read that for years, I have to confess, but this one just like sounds even more my cup of tea. Like, it sounds so good, so I'm going to read the blurb to you. Sadie Hussein is the new girl at the prestigious Alfred Nobel Academy. She has no idea what to expect of her mysterious new boarding school. Suddenly everyone is talking about Sadie, including the unholy trinity, the three most popular girls at school. And then a student is found dead. It's clear there's more to Alfred Nobel Academy and its students than Sadie could have imagined, but secrets lurk around every corner, secrets that rival even her own. I am very much in a horror mood at the minute. which was probably exemplified by my rhapsodizing about the House of Hunger at the beginning of this video, but you know, give it to me, all of it now. I want to read middle grade and horror. Apparently those are the two things at the minute I'm in the mood for, so yeah. But yeah, those are all the books I had to show you, and I now need to literally go and pack them. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd love to know if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them. I'd love to know if you'd like any moving vlogs or any like bookshelf organizing, office decorating themed vlogs. And another massive thank you to Anna Louisa for sponsoring this video. Make sure to check them out via the link in the description box down below, and maybe treat yourself or somebody you love to some beautiful jewellery. But until next time, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye everyone.